The universe had long been a place of tranquility, a tapestry woven with the quiet hum of distant stars and the slow, steady march of time. Life as it existed across countless worlds was diverse in form and thought, yet peace seemed to be the common denominator for the majority of the galaxies. Species rose and fell, but none seemed to carry the heavy weight of aggression for long. That was until the humans came into the fold, bursting onto the galactic stage with an emotion as ancient as their species itself: anger. The Valorans were the first to encounter the humans. They were an ancient race, serene and wise, having traveled across galaxies, leaving behind no scars or destruction. They had witnessed countless civilizations grow and fall, but always with a sense of inevitability, understanding that life in its many forms would one day be gone. The Valorans had evolved beyond petty squabbles and, with centuries of peace, they regarded other species with an almost clinical curiosity. They believed in teaching, not conquering, in sharing wisdom rather than resources. So, when their scouts observed the humans, turbulent and unpredictable as they were, they decided it was time to make contact. They believed humanity's aggressive nature was something that could be tempered with time, guidance, and education. Surely these short-lived creatures would see the value in peace. With a fleet of gleaming ships, the Valerans made their way to Earth, a blue and green marble floating in the vastness of space. They chose a secluded area, a dense forest in North America, as the location for their landing, hoping to minimize any panic or disturbance. The ships descended gently, their sleek, silver forms reflecting the sunlight as they touched down softly on the earth below. Humanity's leaders were alerted, and a team of military officials, scientists, and ambassadors was hastily assembled to meet the visitors. At first, there was tension, the kind that often accompanies the unknown. But the Valorans made no move to suggest hostility. They simply waited, standing still and offering no threat, exuding an aura of peace. When the first Valoran stepped down from the craft, there was a collective hush among the humans present. They observed the alien's delicate movements, its skin shimmering in the light. The Valoran spoke in perfect English, a language they had studied extensively during their surveillance of Earth. "We come in peace," it said, its voice smooth and melodic, its tone calm and disarming. For a moment there was silence. Humanity, still on edge, regarded the being with cautious curiosity. The air was thick with uncertainty. Some humans took cautious steps forward, extending tentative hands in greeting, while others, more skeptical, held back. Yet, it was the politicians who spoke first, their hunger for power overriding any thought of diplomacy. One prominent leader, his face flushed with arrogance, stepped forward. "We demand knowledge," he said, his voice raised in a challenge. "We've watched you from afar. It's time you share your technology with us." The Valoran, with its infinite patience, responded softly, "We do not give what is not earned. You must understand this knowledge is not simply a gift, it is a responsibility." The leader scoffed, his anger rising. "You come here and expect us to bow to you?" He took a step closer, his eyes burning with indignation. "You will regret this. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The Valoran, sensing the shift in tone, remained still, not responding with force but with understanding. It had dealt with many species before, some violent, some peaceful, but it was the anger that the Valorans hadn't yet encountered on this scale. Pure, unbridled, and so fierce that it seemed to resonate through the air itself. The first crack in the cosmic peace had been made, and in that moment, the universe learned what fear was. It all happened so quickly. The shift from peaceful curiosity to violent hostility was a transformation the Valorans could not have predicted. When the human leader raised his voice demanding answers, the atmosphere changed. His words were laced with pride and arrogance, but it was the challenge behind them that ignited something deep within the collective human psyche. The Valorans, who had traveled the cosmos for millennia, did not comprehend the fury that was now building. The Valoran, still composed and calm, attempted to explain further. This technology is not something we give freely. It is not a gift to be used recklessly. You are not ready for it. Their words were diplomatic, measured, but in that instant, the human leader's patience evaporated. Without warning, he lunged forward, his hand reaching toward the Valoran in a gesture of aggression, his fist raised. "You think you can talk down to us?" he spat. "You come to our world and expect us to bow to your so-called wisdom? We won't be treated like children." The Valoran recoiled, its instincts finally responding to the perceived threat. The gentle hum of their ships shifted, a low frequency that had been embedded in the design of the technology for eons as it calibrated its defensive systems. In that moment of panic, the Valoran reacted not out of malice but in self-preservation. The air crackled, and a beam of energy shot out, striking the human leader in the chest before he could get any closer. The force wasn't lethal, but enough to send him sprawling backward, crumpling to the ground with a grunt of pain. The crowd gasped in shock. For a brief moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. The Valorans, in their thousands of years of peaceful existence, had never once been forced to use violence. Yet now the ripple of fear, unfamiliar and strange, passed through their ranks. They had no experience with such reckless aggression, no history of dealing with beings who could lash out with. But it was not the Valorans who ignited the true fury of humanity. It was the humans themselves. The leader, wounded but not broken, struggled to his feet. His eyes were wide with rage, his hands trembling with the need to retaliate. "You think you can control us? You think you're the masters of this world?" he roared, his voice cutting through the tense silence. In that moment, something within the human crowd snapped. The fear and confusion that had been creeping through the onlookers were overtaken by a primal instinct, one that had been buried deep within them for centuries. It was the instinct to fight. A soldier, somewhere in the back of the crowd, pulled a weapon. His hands shook as he aimed it at the Valoran ship. Without thinking, he fired. The shot missed, but it was enough to break the fragile barrier of peace. Panic rippled through the crowd like a wave crashing against a shore. More weapons were drawn, more shots fired, and in an instant, the forest was alive with chaos. The Valorans, still trying to understand, were forced to react. They attempted to defuse the situation, sending out calming pulses through their ship's intercom systems. But it was too late. The humans had already seen what they wanted to see. Their anger had been provoked, and the challenge had been thrown down. For the first time in the history of the universe, something new had been introduced: humanity's fury. The Valorans, who had never known fear, felt it now, and the universe, once peaceful and stable, was no longer the same. The seeds of conflict had been planted, and they were about to grow into something far larger than anyone could have anticipated. In the span of mere moments, the peaceful intentions of the Valorans had been replaced by the unyielding wrath of a species that had learned, in its short history, the destructive power of anger. The universe had never seen anything like it, and it would never be the same again. The chaos that erupted in the forest was unlike anything the Valorans had encountered in all their millennia of exploration. It wasn't just the physical violence that stunned them, though that was enough. It was the sheer intensity, the lack of restraint, the unrelenting force with which the humans fought back. The Valorans, though far more advanced in technology, had always prided themselves on their calm, deliberate nature. Their solutions had always been peaceful: negotiation, persuasion, understanding. But now, facing a species that acted not out of reason but pure emotion, they found themselves caught in a storm they had no hope of weathering with their usual methods. The human soldiers were the first to make a move. They were trained for moments like this, for the fear and adrenaline that surged through their veins. The sight of the human leader knocked unconscious, bleeding and vulnerable, had triggered a primal response in them. Weapons were drawn, orders barked, and a plan formulated not in the cool calculation of reason, but in the heat of rage. Fighter jets roared overhead, their engines screeching as they rocketed into the sky, weaving between the towering trees as they locked onto the Valoran ships with terrifying precision. From their vantage point, the Valorans could see the humans coordinating quickly, organizing into teams with terrifying efficiency. It wasn't just that they fought back, it was the way they fought, as if there was nothing they wouldn't do to exact vengeance. The Valoran ships had shields, advanced technology far beyond what Earth's weapons could even hope to achieve. But that didn't matter to the humans. They had something else, the kind of ferocity that came with survival, with pride, with a deep, deep anger. In this moment, the Valorians realized the full depth of humanity's spirit. When pushed, humans did not simply defend themselves. They attacked with a force that was boundless, fueled by something far more dangerous than mere self-preservation. Missiles and laser fire flew toward the ships, striking the force fields with resounding impacts. The ships shimmered under the barrage, their shielding systems holding for now. But the humans weren't backing down. They had learned quickly not just how to fight, but how to fight dirty. One of the jets, a sleek fighter jet with a nose as sharp as a blade, fired a missile at the base of one of the Valoran ships. The ship's force field crackled under the stress, and for a fraction of a second, it faltered. That was all it took. The missile struck, sending the ship spiraling to the ground in an explosion of fire and twisted metal. The humans cheered, their fury transformed into reckless triumph. They weren't just attacking an alien force. They were showing the universe something that had long been buried in their souls. They could and would fight back. From the Valoran perspective, it was as if the planet itself had turned against them. Every time they attempted to retreat, to disengage, the humans met them with more fury. The remaining ships shot into the sky, retreating at full speed, but the humans pursued. Another missile volley and another Valoran ship fell. This one caught mid-slot by a lucky shot from one of Earth's more advanced fighter jets. Inside the remaining ships, the Valorans were in shock. Their strategy had been sound: approach, communicate, share knowledge. It had always worked with every other species they had encountered. But here, with these humans, their calm was useless. The response they had received was not one of reason, but one of violence. It was as if humanity had been waiting for this moment, waiting for something to provoke them into unleashing the full brunt of their anger. And now that it had been unleashed, there was no controlling it. One of the Valoran commanders, her face a mixture of disbelief and fear, spoke in a frantic tone over their communication lines. "We have underestimated them. This species, they fight not to survive, but to dominate. We need to leave. We need to regroup." But even as they said these words, the humans were closing in, their jets and weapons swarming like an army of hornets, buzzing in relentless pursuit. The Valorans had never faced an enemy like this. They had never known such unbridled rage, such a willingness to fight and die for the sake of an emotion. The battle, once thought to be a simple meeting of cultures, had transformed into something else entirely. It was now a full-scale conflict, one that would define the fate of both species. And in the midst of it all, the Valorans were left with one chilling realization. They had awakened something within humanity that they could not control, something far more terrifying than any advanced technology they possessed. Humanity's rage was now a force to be reckoned with, and the universe would never be the same. The aftermath of the first battle was nothing short of catastrophic. What had begun as a diplomatic mission, a simple meeting of two worlds, had devolved into a full-scale conflict, the likes of which the universe had never witnessed. The forest where the first Valoran ships had touched down was now a smoldering wasteland, filled with the wreckage of fallen ships and the remnants of the once pristine landscape. The earth itself seemed to be scarred by the violence, as if it too had been affected by the raw, uncontained fury of humanity. The Valorans, though advanced in technology and knowledge, were shaken. They had survived the first wave of human retaliation, but at a cost. 2 of their ships were destroyed, and the third was damaged beyond repair. For the first time in their long history, they found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about the universe. They had come to Earth expecting to offer wisdom, to guide the humans toward peace, but instead, they had been met with an unexpected, savage resistance. As the Valoran survivors retreated, their ships hovering just above the charred Earth, they communicated with the remaining councils and leaders within their fleet. They had underestimated humanity's capacity for violence, and worse yet, they had underestimated the anger that lay dormant in the hearts of these strange creatures. They had been wrong to think they could manage the humans with their usual methods. The humans were not a species that could be swayed by gentle words and peaceful gestures. They had awakened something deep within the human spirit, a fury that had long been suppressed, but was now free to reign unchecked. Back on Earth, the world watched in stunned silence. The footage of the battle broadcasted live across the planet had sent shockwaves through every nation. People were glued to their screens, unable to believe what they were seeing. The once calm blue skies were now marred by plumes of smoke and the distant sound of explosions. Governments scrambled to assess the damage, but the situation was far from under control. Humanity had just waged war against an alien species, and the planet's leaders had no idea what the repercussions would be. In the wake of the battle, there were whispers of fear of what humanity had just unleashed. Some world leaders saw the destruction of the Valoran fleet as a triumph, a victory that proved humanity's resilience and power, but others saw it for what it was, a warning. They had just fought a species that had no history of aggression, no history of war. The Valorans, despite their advanced technology, were not prepared for humanity's raw, untamed fury. And now that the universe knew what humans were capable of, there was no telling what would happen next. Despite the initial celebrations, there was a growing sense of dread. The humans had won, but at what cost? What if the Valorans were only the beginning? What if other, more aggressive species, more capable of inflicting destruction, took notice of what had happened? The very thought sent a chill through humanity's collective consciousness. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. The Valorans, now scattered across the stars, were left to lick their wounds and regroup. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying the price. But they would not go down without a fight. They would return, stronger and more prepared, and the universe, once peaceful and unaware of the potential for chaos, would never be the same. Humanity's presence in the cosmos had been marked not with peace, but with a ferocity that no one could ignore. The universe had learned its first lesson: never provoke a species that fights not just for survival, but for pride, for rage, and for something far darker that simmered beneath the surface. The galaxy was holding its breath, and humanity, in its newfound power, was only beginning to realize the full extent of what it had just done. The aftermath of humanity's first encounter with the Valorans rippled across the cosmos, and the full weight of what had transpired began to set in. What had initially seemed like a localized skirmish was quickly becoming a galactic crisis. The Valorans, scattered and defeated, were not simply retreating, they were pleading for help. Their once proud civilization, shaken to its core, now sought refuge among the oldest and most powerful factions of the galaxy. These were races that had never known war, who had lived for eons in peace and relative isolation. Yet now, the terrifying prospect of a violent species, humans, was knocking at their door. Within the council chambers of the Galactic Senate, debate raged. Representatives from every corner of the universe gathered to discuss the human threat. The Valorans were adamant. "We cannot allow this species to grow unchecked," one of the elder statesmen warned. "Their anger is unlike anything we've encountered. Their potential for destruction is boundless. We must intervene before it's too late." Others, more cautious, argued that the humans were too unpredictable to judge in such a way. "We do not know them. We do not understand them," one of the more pacifistic delegates said. "Their actions were born of fear and anger, not malice. Perhaps they simply need guidance, not condemnation." But the voices of caution grew quieter as more data from Earth flooded in. Humanity's response to the Valoran incursion was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a deeper, more ingrained aspect of their nature. Across the globe, governments began to mobilize, not just to prepare for any further conflict with the Valorans, but to assess how they could defend themselves against future galactic threats. The realization dawned on many that humanity, for better or worse, had just placed itself on the map of the galaxy in a way no one had expected. The information gathered about humanity was stark. A species that had been capable of such overwhelming destruction in defense of its pride was now a target of both fear and fascination. To some, humanity represented a new, untamed force in the universe, one that could tip the balance of power in galactic politics. To others, humanity was a dangerous outlier, a species that could unravel the peace the universe had so carefully cultivated for millennia. As the Council met, an emergency transmission came in from a neutral zone, an alliance of several older and more experienced galactic races. They proposed an assembly, one where representatives from both the Valorans and humanity would be present. It was clear that the universe was divided. Some believed that humanity needed to be controlled, its violent tendencies checked before they could threaten all of existence. Others felt that the humans were merely misunderstood, that their emotions, though intense, were not inherently evil. But as humanity's leaders gathered to decide how to respond, a more troubling question began to emerge. If they chose to try and integrate with the larger galactic community, would they be able to maintain their autonomy? The Valerans, having suffered the brunt of humanity's wrath, were now advocating for harsh measures, perhaps even a containment strategy. Some argued that humanity had to be shown that it could not operate without restraint in a peaceful galaxy. Others feared the opposite, that humanity, once provoked, would never stop until it had conquered everything. The conversation quickly turned to what might happen if humanity was left unchecked, or worse, if the humans sought retribution. The universe had never known such unchecked aggression, and now it found itself facing the consequences. A balance that had been carefully maintained for eons was now hanging by a thread, and the galaxy's most powerful factions were forced to consider whether the human race was a threat, too dangerous to allow freedom, or a wild card that could either be harnessed or extinguished. As the debate reached its peak, one question seemed to dominate all others. Had humanity unknowingly triggered a conflict that would now be fought across the stars? The universe, a place once thought to be peaceful and harmonious, now faced a new reality. For the first time in its history, the peaceful races were afraid, not of war, but of the emotional fire that could burn through everything. And humanity, in its anger and pride, had become the first species to ignite that fire. As the Galactic Council convened, the weight of the decision to be made felt heavier with each passing moment. The universe, once united in its commitment to peace and cooperation, now stood at a precipice. Humanity had shown itself to be a force of chaos, a species driven by emotions that ran deeper and darker than any other the galaxy had encountered. Anger, pride, and the untamed drive for vengeance had unleashed a storm that could not be undone. Yet, despite the fury that had erupted across the stars, there was still a small but growing faction within the Galactic Council that believed in humanity's potential for change. Among the delegates, there were those who had seen the aftermath of the Vyloran encounter differently. They saw not the violent outbreak of a species without control, but rather the first stirrings of something new. A passion that, if channeled properly, could serve as a great asset to the galaxy. They argued that the humans were not inherently evil, nor were they simply an uncontrolled beast. They were a young species, still finding their way in the grand tapestry of the universe. If given the chance, the humans could learn from their mistakes. The question was whether the universe would allow them the time to evolve, or whether it would crush them beneath the weight of its fear. This faction, led by a coalition of more liberal species who had long advocated for peaceful coexistence, argued for diplomacy. They proposed a new approach, not containment, but education. Instead of treating humanity like a dangerous animal to be caged, they would extend a hand of friendship. The galaxy, they argued, had never faced a species like humanity, but that was no reason to abandon its principles. What the humans needed was not war, but understanding. They needed to be shown how their emotions, powerful as they were, could be channeled for good, not destruction. But the opposition was fierce. The Valorans, scarred from their encounter, were vocal in their condemnation. "This species cannot be reasoned with," their representatives shouted, their voices laced with both fear and indignation. "Their emotions are a weapon, and we have seen how they use it. To allow them to grow unchecked is to invite catastrophe." Other races, particularly those who had suffered at the hands of smaller, more violent species in the past, supported the Valoran stance. They called for drastic measures, blockades, sanctions, even the use of force, to ensure humanity's growth was controlled, if not eradicated. But amid the heated debate, a small group of human diplomats stood in the council chamber, a mix of military leaders, political figures, and scientists who had come together to represent their species. They were caught between fear and hope, knowing that the fate of humanity rested on their ability to convince the galaxy that their kind was not a lost cause. Humanity was unpredictable, yes, and reckless, but they had the capacity for growth. They had the ability to learn from their mistakes, and perhaps most importantly, the desire to prove their worth to the cosmos. One of the human ambassadors, a woman named Olivia Durant, stepped forward to address the council. Her voice was steady, though the weight of the moment pressed on her shoulders like a physical force. "We understand your fears," she began, her eyes sweeping across the delegates. "We have seen the destruction we've caused, and we are not proud of it. But we ask you to look beyond our anger. Look beyond what we've done in fear and pain. What we did was not out of malice, it was out of the deep need to protect ourselves and our home." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Humanity is not a perfect species. We've made mistakes, and we've suffered because of them. But we are capable of learning, of evolving. We are not asking for your forgiveness, but for a chance to prove that we can be better, that we can be allies, not enemies." The council fell silent. The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something, a hint of possibility. The delegates murmured among themselves, unsure whether to trust the sincerity in the human's voice or to dismiss it as more of the same dangerous arrogance they had already witnessed. Yet, for the first time, a few began to question the wisdom of simply treating humanity as a threat. Was it possible that Olivia Durant and her fellow humans could be telling the truth? Could their rage, that primal force, be harnessed for something greater than destruction? But even as the debate continued, another force was moving in the shadows. An alliance of darker, more powerful factions who had been watching the events unfold from afar. These were races that had long operated in secrecy, their intentions veiled by years of manipulation and subtle influence. They had their own reasons for wanting humanity contained, or perhaps even eradicated. They were not motivated by fear of what humanity could become, but by the fear of what it might disrupt. For all the talk of peace, there were those who saw in humanity not a challenge to be faced, but a threat to be eliminated. And so, as the debate raged on in the council chambers, the universe moved closer to an inevitable conclusion. Whether humanity would find its place among the stars, or whether it would be crushed beneath the weight of its own potential. It was a moment of uncertainty, of fate hanging in the balance, and only time would tell if the universe's decision would lead to salvation or to the unraveling of everything they had fought so hard to build. The tension in the galaxy reached a boiling point. The Council's deliberations dragged on, with no resolution in sight. On one side, the Valorans and their allies pushed for immediate action, believing that humanity's unchecked aggression posed an existential threat to the peaceful order of the universe. On the other side, there were those who still clung to the belief that humanity's potential for change outweighed its current flaws. In the center, humanity itself was caught between desperation and defiance, unsure of whether it was being given a second chance or if it was already too late to turn back. In the midst of the political and philosophical wrangling, Olivia Durant and her fellow human diplomats continued to argue for humanity's right to prove itself. But even she could feel the ground shifting beneath her. The message from the Valorans had been clear. Humanity had caused irreparable damage, and the galaxy's patience was running thin. What had begun as a plea for understanding had slowly morphed into a desperate defense of humanity's very existence. She knew that the clock was ticking, and every moment of hesitation was one more step toward irrevocable action. Outside the council chambers, humanity's fate was being decided not just by political rhetoric, but by the actions of those on the ground. Earth had been preparing for the worst. Military forces were on high alert. Alliances were being formed with smaller, less powerful species, and humanity's leadership was coordinating with a growing coalition of like-minded races. The idea of a galactic peace was fading quickly into the background as humanity braced itself for a future where it would have to defend itself against forces far larger and more ancient than it could have ever anticipated. But what no one had expected was the sudden shift in the tides of the war. While the major factions were locked in debate, an unknown force began to stir in the far reaches of the galaxy. A series of unexplained attacks had been reported on Valoran colonies, on peaceful outposts, and even on once neutral systems. These attacks were not from humanity, they were from a darker, more ruthless faction that had kept itself hidden for centuries. The very faction that had seen humanity's rise as an opportunity, a threat to their power and control. These shadowy forces were the ones who had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes, orchestrating the crisis to weaken the unity of the galaxy and sow division among its leaders. They saw humanity not as an existential threat, but as an unpredictable player that could be manipulated to disrupt the peace, making it easier for them to assert control over the galaxy's fragile stability. They had fed into the Valorans' fear and used it to their advantage, all while staying in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. When their actions were finally uncovered, the galaxy was rocked by the revelation. The sudden realization that a rogue faction had been manipulating the situation was enough to shift the balance of power within the Council. With this new information, the debate took a sharp turn. The threat now wasn't just humanity. It was a faction that was willing to destroy everything in its path to maintain dominance. In a rare moment of unity, the Council came together, with representatives from the Valorans, humanity, and even some of the more neutral factions banding together to confront this new, hidden enemy. The alliance was fragile, built on distrust, but the urgency of the situation left no room for hesitation. Humanity, despite its aggression, had unwittingly exposed a much greater danger. The war that was brewing wasn't about humanity's place in the galaxy. It was about preventing a far worse fate. The decision was made. The galaxy would unite against this common threat, and humanity, with its fierce will and newfound alliances, would stand at the forefront of the battle. It was an unexpected turn of events, but humanity's raw strength and determination had made it a crucial part of the defense against the shadowy forces that threatened them all. As humanity prepared for the coming conflict, the universe took a collective breath. The outcome of this war would not only determine the fate of humanity, but also the future of the galaxy itself. It was no longer about anger or pride. It was about survival. And in that struggle, the universe had learned one undeniable truth. Humanity, with all its flaws and passion, was a force that could not be ignored.